Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and what follows is an excerpted clip from one of my longer webinars. So what I've decided is that sometimes when people ask really interesting questions, I will pull out that particular part of a webinar and make it available to you as a short clip so that if you don't have time to watch a 1-hour webinar, you can at least watch and listen to the brief exchanges that I usually have with people who attend my webinars. So here is one such clip from a recent webinar. I hope you enjoy it. Previously, we discussed part 2. So by the end of part 2, we know that Okonoko is returning back after 7 years of exile to his own tribe, to his own village. We also have certain hints that quite a few things are changing. A new religion, Christianity, has come in. In his mother's village, he has already encountered these people. So we have a certain expectation that the village that he goes back to is not going to be the same. And Okonoko knows that, but he's planning a grand comeback. He wants to go back, build a bigger compound, marry another couple of wives, initiate his sons into the new tradition, and slowly take his place in the hierarchy of his own village. That is his plan. Now, in part 3, what happens is when he gets back to his village, he realizes, first of all, people's response to him is kind of lukewarm. Some people are excited, of course, his friend Obraika and others, but people themselves are divided. Some of them have converted to Christianity. There is a church and an administrator appointed by the British who is called the district commissioner. He's the one who runs that region. He has people working for him who are African, but they are from different parts of Africa. So those are what are called his messengers, right? And then within the tribe, there is strife itself. Some of the people from the tribe have converted to the new faith. But for right now, Mr. Brown, who runs the church, is not a conflictual person. He is following kind of a soft approach, and that is that he goes and talks to the tribal chiefs. He doesn't just call them heathens and all, and he tries to learn their ways. There is a good discussion between a tribal elder and him about oneness of God. And then there are stores in the village, the company stores, people buy things from there. And economy has improved because whatever they used to grow now can be sold in the market. Other villages buy them. So capitalism is entering, a new administration has come in, and a new religion, right? That is the change scenario in which technically the culture of the tribe has shifted. Now, Okonoko, of course, is set in his old ways, right? But he realizes that things have changed. Now, there is an interesting, on my book, page 175, is an interesting insight there, which you can apply to even today's life too, and that is the figure of the Kotma, or the messenger, right? Kotma of the ash buttocks. He is fit to be a slave. The white man has no sense. He's fit to be a slave. Now, this is the role of supervisors or overseers in the slave economy, or what we call mid-level managers. Think of it in your own minds if you have worked. A mid-level manager is someone who is slightly above the workers, has no executive power, cannot change policy, cannot introduce new things, only interprets what the superiors want him to pass on to the workers, right? The superiors don't give him much importance because he's just slightly above the workers. The workers despise him because he's the one or she's the one who implements the policy, right? That used to be a very precarious situation on plantations. and you'll read a lot of material on it, is because sometimes the slave owners would appoint a slave as a supervisor of other slaves. What that did was the burden on that supervisor was huge. He had to prove his loyalty to the master, that he can be equally as good as the white slavers, right? But at the same time, people didn't take him seriously because he was one of them. So most of the times, the African supervisors ended up being more brutal to slaves because they were trying to prove their superiority to other slaves, but they are also trying to prove to their masters that it doesn't matter if these people look like them, they are going to implement the rules of the master. So that dynamic is at play here between the messengers, because they are also the interpreters. Now, what the British did was they will bring soldiers and workers from other tribes, sometimes from a tribe that was enemy to the tribe that they were trying to administer. And that way, they would ensure that they were working with pre-existing distrust amongst the people. So there was no monolithic African resistance, right? So the figure of the messengers then, and those who work, the deputy commissioner and others, then become these instruments of the Europeans, right? And since they don't know the local culture, they end up disrespecting the very elders whom we have known. 6 of them get arrested, right? They get beaten up even Okonoko gets beaten up, right? Now we are seeing them, these characters that we have known throughout the story, from the point of view of the other. How did the British view them, right? And how did those who work for the British view them, both from the church and from the civil administration? So this part of the novel technically is telling us what has shifted, right? Previously, we read about one intact culture, what were their customs, marriage, justice, and all. Now, all those customs are under erasure through religion, but also the legal system has been taken over by a foreign power. So they neither have the power to dispense justice nor to practice their own gods in an unquestionable way. That is, things fall apart. That is what is happening. And what Okonoko also learns is that the tribe is no longer willing to fight. These are not the warriors that he had imagined or he had grown up with. And then when 6 of them are arrested and mistreated, when the entire tribe comes together, right? Okonoko knows that they are not going to fight, right? And that is when he takes that ultimate step, right? He goes out and kills the lead messenger. He knows what he has done, right? He also knows that if he doesn't atone for it personally, the wrath of the new masters will fall on the whole village, right? And so he does the unthinkable. He goes and hangs himself, right? He commits suicide, which is the absolutely taboo thing to do in Igbo culture. So taboo that his own tribes people can't even touch his body or bury. Someone else might do it, right? And so that is the tragic end of Okonoko. Part of it obviously was because of his pride in himself, but also in his customs. But part of it is that the world that he knows in which he existed is no longer the same world, right? It is changing spiritually, but the political power has changed too, and he has no place in it, right? The most instructive part for me is the last long paragraph. Think of it this way. We have just read the rich, complex story of a person named Okonoko, the culture that he lived in, the life that he lived, flawed, troubled, but we've gotten to know him, right? But why does Achebe end at the commissioner, right? The commissioner went away, taking 3 or 4 of the soldiers with him. In the many years in which he had toiled to bring civilization to different parts of Africa, he had learned a number of things. One of them was that a district commissioner must never attend to such undignified details as cutting a hangman from the tree. So keep that in mind. That was a very strong British policy. Wherever their civil servants worked, they would always maintain a separate persona. They had to maintain this idea of we are above this, right? Almost like a godlike persona, so that they were never seen doing any menial labor. They were never seen doing anything that normal human beings do. All their needs were met, right? That gave them that aura of power, right? That's what Achebe is kind of critiquing here. Such attention would give the natives a poor opinion of him. In the book which he planned to write, he would stress that point. As he walked back to the court, he thought about that book. Every day brought him some new material. The story of this man who had killed a messenger and hanged himself would make interesting reading. One could almost write a whole chapter on him. Perhaps not a whole chapter, but a reasonable paragraph. At any rate, there was so much else to include, and one must be firm in cutting out details. He had already chosen the title of the book after much thought: The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger, right? So we end at the colonizer's view of this rich, complex culture, right? Now, that is not too far from the truth. The British officers did write these books. I have a book right on my shelf, which I cited in one of my books. It was published in 1884, I think. It's called The Indian Mussulmans. That's by a British officer, W.W.H. Hunter, who was a British official. His study of the Northwest Indian Muslims and what qualities do they have. So these officers did produce cultural, but also almost pseudo-anthropological accounts, because one of their purpose was to keep creating more knowledge so that the government can understand these people better. And if they can understand them better, of course, they can control them better. But I think the juxtaposition that Achebe is giving over here is this person. He has just seen the dead body of Okonoko. We have just read a novel about Okonoko. We know his life. We know his children's name. How did he treat his wives? Why did he get exiled? We know all the details that the novel has given him. It's a rich life, right? It's a tragic life. But in his book, from his point of view, it may not even be a paragraph, right? And that is how Africans in so many ways figure in the European accounts, either as a backdrop, right? Or as someone not understood, or as primitive who needs to be pacified. So I think the last lines of the novel kind of hint at the way British or the Europeans saw Africans and saw Africa. Now you, me, and others who have read the novel, we already know what a rich life Okonoko has lived, a troubled life, that he was a complex human being capable of valor, but also capable of cruel things. He loved his daughter, right? All of those things which we associate with any normal human being who has lived a life, right? They do not translate to the British consciousness. Because the British did need this kind of view of the natives in order to justify their own control of them, right? So the missionaries needed it to prove that they are bringing light to the heathens, right? And the administrators believed that they were bringing a system of order, a system of law, even though their system of law, as we see when they incarcerate the 6 chiefs, to them, it might come across as just, but it's transgressive, right? It doesn't keep in mind, or it doesn't understand the subtleties of the culture that they are dealing with, right? Okay, no problem, Harish. So that is kind of my final thoughts about part 3. But overall, as you read the novel, and you've read it, right? As I mentioned in the earlier parts of our conversations, that Achebe doesn't give us a magical black man. He doesn't give us an uncomplicated African character. That is not his mission. Achebe is also the person who had indicted Conrad for just treating Africans in his novel as just appendages, as these dark presences. What Achebe, I think, sets out to do is write a novel, a character-driven novel in which we have a strong character who is deeply flawed, and then gives us the backdrop of culture within which Okonoco becomes who he is. Sometimes he defies that culture. What religious practices were followed? So by the time we finish reading the book, we don't just know about Okonoco's struggles. We have learned so much about the proverbs that the people use. What was the family situation? Polygamy, right? How did the wives live? We know that the husband lived separately in his own hut, which was called the obi, that people had different titles and hierarchy. They grew yams, right? We also know that they had different kinds of death rituals, marriage rituals. We learn that. We also learn what happens, when someone transgresses, what is the power of religion? How do the justices or the spirits of the ancestors meet and perform their identity? So by the time we finish the novel, we aren't just privy to Okonoco's struggles or just the colonial influence. We've also learned more than what we ever learned about Conrad's African characters. We have learned a lot about a specific Igbo culture based in the 10 villages in which Okonoco lives. And I think that is what makes the novel so compelling. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this brief clip. If you are interested in the longer version, the link will be in the description and you can watch the whole webinar. Thank you so much for your support. And as always, if you have any questions, any concerns, you can always post them in the comments and I'll be happy to respond to them. If you have a moment and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now so that you get timely notifications of whatever is happening on this channel. Thank you for your support. Stay safe, and as always, from me to you, peace and love.